for most of you been paying attention, there have been anti-Muslim riots across England that pretty much reached a dead end, and the riots began in response to, I hate to say this term, I hate to say it, but online disinformation. That the stabbing of three young British girls in a town in a neighborhood called Southgate were killed by a Muslim migrant, an illegal migrant, undocumented migrant. They were in fact killed by a native-born Christian whose family came from Rwanda. And this bogus information was spread by Tommy Robinson, who is the former leader of the English Defense League, a very suspect organization, which kind of grew out of the British National Party. But the British National Party was officially anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. And the English Defense League suddenly emerges with skinheads in combat boots waving Israeli flags with a lot more resources behind it. And Tommy Robinson suddenly emerges as this globally influential leader who's inciting riots and violence in the UK from Cyprus, where he's basically on vacation, hanging out by a pool. And Elon Musk, who is seated in the VIP gallery for Netanyahu's speech at the US Capitol, has been amplifying this and predicting again and again that the UK is heading for civil war. So I think it's important to do David Miller, who was driven out of his tenured academic position at the University of Bath in England by the UK-based Israel lobby, is doing, which is to highlight all of the Israel lobby's links to Tommy Robinson and the shared values between the instigators of these rioters and the Netanyahu government. David Miller said, to those saying that Tommy Robinson may have been or may be in an alliance with the Zionists, or that his financial relationships with Zionists are all in the past, or the data is out of date, or that the EDL, the English Defense League, no longer exists, and all the variations of this line. Here's one example of his relations with Rebel News. Rebel News being a pro-Israel Canadian outlet sponsored by many Canadian Zionists. As you know, this is The Guardian. Robert Shillman backed Rebel Media, which has promoted Tommy Robinson. They have an interview with Tommy Robinson right now on Rebel Media's site. The Middle East, and Robert Shillman also is a huge backer of David Horowitz, Caroline Glick, a lot of the right-wing Zionists in the U.S. He has buildings named after him, I think, at Boston University. The Middle East Forum, that's Daniel Pipes' neocon outlet, donated money for Tommy Robinson's legal fees. Then you have the Gatestone Institute of the Zionist billionaire heiress Nina Rosenwald, which has done a lot to support Tommy Robinson's cause and has also helped sponsor the career of John Bolton.
I love it when these guys had the last names to match, like Shillman. I mean, you know, a man who funds a lot of shills.
Here's today or yesterday. This is 3 days ago. Tommy Robinson speaks out on Rebel News. So it's very clear that Tommy Robinson would be nobody without all of this support from the Zionist lobby. I wrote about this for years, and I have a paper you can it's kind of a piece of analysis that mixes analysis and reporting to demonstrate how the pro-Israel movement, which you would actually call the Israel lobby, generated the wave of Islamophobia that swept the West after 9/11, but particularly during the Obama era. I call it the axis of Islamophobia, and it runs from Tel Aviv to London to New York and Washington. it's now so clear that the Israel lobby has its fingerprints. I'm not saying they're like all behind it, but they have their fingerprints on the instability that has gripped the UK while Keir Starmer himself was on vacation. And his police proved unable to defend people from violence at the hands of Tommy Robinson's mobs. Now, I mentioned Elon Musk constantly pushing the idea of civil war in the UK. Here's Elon Musk seated next to Douglas Murray, the soft-handed neocon fanatic, seated directly behind Noah Argamani, who is an Israeli hostage in the Gaza Strip. Israel executed one of the most gruesome assaults on Gaza, killing around 200 people, mostly children, at an open-air market in Deir al-Balah in order to free her. And they were VIP guests of Netanyahu, seated in the U.S. Capitol gallery. And this is Douglas Murray, who actually contributed lines to Netanyahu's speech, the British neocon, basically predicting and calling for what took place across the UK.
Yeah, Douglas Murray, who went to Israel after October 7th and just put out nonstop propaganda, ginning up support for Israel's mass murder campaign. He's been on a solo campaign to manufacture consent for Israel. So I'm not surprised he was there for Netanyahu, and then he's all over this Islamophobic outburst in his home country in the UK. It's perfectly in character for him.
Let's listen to what he says carefully.
It's not playing for us, Max, if you're playing it.
Oh, well,
yeah.
That's because I forgot to share it. So, hey, everybody makes mistakes.
But clearly they've lost control of the streets. Now, is it time to send in the army at some point? Probably yes. But if the army will not be sent in, then the public will have to go in, and the public will have to sort this out themselves. And it'll be very, very brutal. I don't want them to live here. I don't want them here. They came under false pretenses. Many of them came illegally and continue to come illegally. And we don't want them here.
So he's essentially calling for the public to go in because the army won't go in. And what will happen will be very brutal. And that's what he wants. I don't think he'll be going in. I mean, at least Tommy Robinson sometimes gets his hands dirty. He's sort of a street thug. Douglas Murray, I don't think he wants to get any marks on his hands. And this is someone who runs the Henry Jackson Society, which is just the nexus of British neoconservatism, which has been funded to the hilt by the Zionist billionaire class and Netanyahu's cutouts. Actually, David Miller produced one of the best investigations of the Henry Jackson Society and its role in shaping some of the worst British policies. Interestingly, Douglas Murray's former spokesman was Michael Weiss, who is now one of the top neocon friends of Syria, who pushed the Syria dirty war for years and created the worst refugee crisis at that point since World War II, and helped fuel this wave of Islamophobia by saddling Europe with over 1 million Syrian refugees. He was the former spokesman for Douglas Murray, and now he pretends to care about Arabs. You're muted.
And that, Max, I'm going to plug your book here because it's a major theme of the management of savagery, where you talk about all these characters, these neocon characters who push regime change wars in countries like Syria, which create refugees. And then that leads to a rise in xenophobia when the refugees come to Western countries or NATO countries for refuge. So they create their own vicious cycle. They create refugees and then demonize them when they arise and gin up hatred against them. It's like the perfect vicious cycle. And again, I mean, your book Manitoba Savagery came out a few years ago now. It was like 2019, 2020, but it called all of this. And now we're seeing in Britain the latest manifestation of it.
Yeah. I mean, you can say the same thing about U.S. policy in Latin America, too, just sanctioning countries like Venezuela. Then, Venezuelans show up everywhere across the U.S., fueling anti-immigration sentiment. It's one of the top issues in this election, in no small part due to Trump's invective, Fox News pushing it, and there's no discussion of why they're here, what happened to their economy. What is Juan Guaido doing on a speaking tour across the U.S. after he looted Venezuela and helped create this migrant wave? And why aren't the right-wingers directing their anger at Carlos Vecchio, who is Juan Guaido's fake ambassador in Washington, former lawyer for ExxonMobil, who was, while simultaneously generating a migration crisis from Venezuela by destroying Venezuela's economy, he was lobbying for TPS, for basically temporary protective status, which is known to Venezuelans and Nicaraguans as parole, where basically anyone can come here. And the reality is, what all my friends in Caracas tell me is they're experiencing a lot less crime there because thanks to Carlos Vecchio, a lot of the criminals have gotten parole to come to the U.S. after their economy was destroyed. So why doesn't the right hold those people responsible? Why is Elon Musk constantly predicting civil war in the UK? There's a lot of money to be made out of this. There's so much money, so much corporate welfare to be generated out of a crisis on the US-Mexico border. And I guarantee you, Elon Musk is here for that through Tesla, through all of his various companies that live off of corporate government welfare, surveillance, R&D for surveillance. And it's the same thing in the UK. The UK, what is the response? What is the real response of the British government to these fascistic riots? The response was laid bare by the Met Police chief.
We will throw the full force of the law at people. And whether you're in this country committing crimes on the streets or committing crimes from further afield online, we will come after you.
Talk to me about that, because we have seen some high-profile figures whipping up the hatred. You talked about it in there with the officers, in fact, about this being added to by online commentary. I mean, I'm even thinking of the likes of Elon Musk getting involved. What are you considering when it comes to dealing with people who are whipping up this kind of behavior from behind a keyboard, maybe in a different country?
Being a keyboard warrior does not make you safe from the law. You can be guilty of offences of incitement, of stirring up racial hatred. There are numerous terrorist offences regarding the sort of publishing of material. All of those offences are in play if people are provoking hatred and violence on the streets, and we will come after those individuals just as we will physically confront on the streets the thugs and the obs who are causing the problems for communities.
So a lot to chew on there. Basically, the response of the UK government is to curtail free speech. I mean, there is no guarantee of free speech in the UK, as there is through the US Constitution. It's online censorship, but to actually prosecute people for what they say is a new escalation. And what the Metropolitan Police Chief is also referring to there is the National Security Act, which was ostensibly inspired by the journalism of the decidedly anti-fascist journalist and British citizen Kit Clarenberg of the Grayzone, which is designed to actually punish British citizens who reveal classified information or publish documents that are seen as harmful to national security. And the national security apparatus that exists under the MI5 gets to decide what is harmful and what isn't. And people can even be prosecuted if they don't know that they're violating the law, if they don't know that it's classified and they don't know it's harmful to national security, which is why the British state, uk.gov, is warning citizens through Twitter, watch what you say. They're just saying, think before you post, but they're not telling them what they can and can't post, and nobody actually knows. It's completely arbitrary.
And Elon Musk ended up just suspending the British government's Twitter account for saying that. They've been suspended for threatening free speech. I mean, so just to clarify, though, some people might hear that British law enforcement official and say, oh, okay, well, that's good. They're going to go after people who are inciting hatred. That's a good thing. But you're saying that they're using the threat of incitement to also justify possibly going after journalists like Kit Clarenberg.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And here's William Owen responding to Kit, who's noticing that the Met police chief is implicitly referring to him by invoking the National Security Act, which doesn't actually have to do with racist incitement. It's like two separate things. In 2023, 3,300 people were arrested in the UK for social media posts. The arrests were often made under the Communications Act 2003, which criminalizes using a public electronic communications network to cause annoyance, inconvenience, or needless anxiety. And there have been recent arrests of people who merely apparently said the wrong thing on Twitter, on other social media outlets.
Okay, and I have to apologize.
Going.
People are correcting me. Apparently, Elon Musk did not suspend the British government Twitter account. That apparently is fake news. I apologize for spreading disinformation. Yeah, they have not been.
Because the kid has to say, remember, the burden is on you to not say anything the British government doesn't like. Crown subjects.
Yeah. Yeah.